my 12th birthday, my dad surprised me with 2 real-life mermaids. I'm currently completely at a loss what to do. I, 21F, have just escaped my parents after finding something horrifying in my dad's beach house. I've always loved mermaids. Yes, I was one of those kids obsessed with everything mermaid, whether that was TV shows, movies, books, any marine-related media really, but mermaids especially. I loved everything about the sea, about water, until I almost drowned on my 5th birthday. So, with a newfound fear of even dipping my toes in the shallows, I became fascinated with fake water instead. Mom called it a mental illness. I can see where she was coming from, considering I asked for every pool or water-related game ever made. But I was just a kid. I preferred water to land, and even terrified of it, I still wanted to submerge myself in it, imagining a whole other world. I barely remember almost drowning, only the contorting fear twisting inside me and swallowing me up, the inability to speak, my voice cruelly torn away, my breath stolen as I sank further into the abyss, also known as the deep end of our neighbor's pool. Mom said I didn't realize it was that deep since I was used to our own pool. There I was, sitting on the edge with my legs swinging and a plate of birthday cake in my hands, when I had the bright idea to show the adults how cute I was. This is my mom's retelling, so it's probably exaggerated, but apparently I dropped headfirst into the pool, cake and all, and sank straight to the bottom. Dad dove in after me, pulling me back to the surface, dragging me from the shallows. But it was too late. I was screaming, hysterical, backing away from the pool like it was filled with lava. The crazy thing is, I remember this exact feeling. I remember staggering back, the ice-cold breeze tickling my cheeks, feeling wrong compared to the warmth of the water that was supposed to protect me. The ice-cold concrete of my neighbor's patio felt wrong. Land felt wrong. The water that had almost killed me felt right, and I could never understand why. Instead of caressing me, this cruel underwater world had dragged me down, 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 squeezing my lungs and stealing my air, crushing instead of cradling me. I avoided water and didn't go near any pool after that, even ours, the very one I used to spend every spare hour splashing around in. When Mom tried to bathe me, I insisted on the water being ankle deep, with her using a cup to rinse my hair as I tilted my head back, squeezing my eyes shut. According to Mom, I would scream until my throat was raw if there was too much water. Even washing my hands and brushing my teeth, I remember timing the flow just right so I could stick my toothbrush or soapy hands under, count 3 elephants, and then dive out of the bathroom. I flooded the floors on multiple occasions when I forgot to turn off the faucet. But still, somehow I was fascinated with water itself. I loved how it was still, how it ran and trickled and filled my cupped hands. According to Mom, I told my therapist I wanted to be a fish. However, my therapist had a sort of resolution. She leaned forward and grabbed my hands, squeezing them tight. Okay, Sadie, well, if you're scared of real water, why don't you try fake water? Which I guess is how my mermaid obsession started. My therapist started me with little kids' games about solving puzzles underwater, and immediately I was hooked. Through my fascination with digital water, I found mermaids, beautiful, human-like fish people who could breathe underwater, living in vast, towering cities deep, deep under the sea. I watched every Little Mermaid, binging mermaid-themed movies and TV shows. By the age of 9, I was fully convinced I was actually a mermaid, and touching water would magically transform my legs into a tail. It didn't, obviously, so I did what any supposedly mentally ill 9-year-old would do. I swallowed 2 teaspoons of salt mixed with tears of terror before sticking my head underwater for 10 seconds. Again, nothing happened. But I was starting to slowly overcome my fear of being submerged in water, so I lowered myself onto the stairs in the shallow end of our pool and forced myself to get used to it. I was still acclimating when my brother shoved my head under, quickly reminding me of that sensation. The squeezing of my chest, the inability to breathe, choking on bubbles exploding around me. After that, Dad insisted on teaching me how to swim. Like me, he'd always been fascinated with water, so he refused to have a child who couldn't swim. Before my older brother and I were even born, he enrolled us in lessons. Harvey was 5 years older than me, so he could already swim. Dad wanted to take me to the sea, though I was more comfortable in the pool. However, my swimming classes were short-lived. I barely learned how to keep my head afloat, when Dad left in the middle of the night and never came back. Neither did my brother. I woke up around midnight to Mom hysterically crying. I discovered the next morning that Dad had taken my brother hookah diving without proper equipment, and Harvey was in the emergency room. Initially, I was told my brother was very sick, which obviously I believed. I was playing Sonic with my brother only yesterday. In my head, he was just sick in the hospital. I spent the day expecting him to drag himself into my bedroom at any time, knock something over, call me a name, and run away. But the house was empty. Mom didn't come out of her room. Not even to take me to school. Instead, I watched Cartoon Network all day. I poked my head in my brother's room, and it was a noticeable mess, clothes strewn everywhere and a half-packed suitcase. When I asked to see Harvey a few days later, Mom told me he was dead. Brain dead at least. She explained it the best she could, choking on her own words. Harvey had gone too deep, and when trying to resurface, his blood had bubbles and his brain had popped. I don't think she was mentally okay enough to explain to her 9-year-old daughter that her brother was dead. Yeah, no, considering she used our SodaStream and a grape to demonstrate the accident with a hysterical smile on her mouth, almost like she thought it was funny. I didn't find it funny. Watching the bubbles in the water and my mother pop a grape between her index and thumb with a huge grin on her face was actually fucking traumatizing. I know people grieve in their own way. Even as a kid though, I was confused when my brother didn't get a funeral. Dad did come back, but only to try and justify his trip with Harvey. He said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and that he was just doing what was best for his kids. I already despised him for taking my brother away, but the way he talked about him, insisting that Harvey loves the water, made me want to scream. He was wrong. While I was obsessed with water, my brother had steered away from it, especially the sea. Mom called him a psycho and threw him out. Dad moved to the other side of town, and it was just Mom and me once again. For a long time, I hated my father. I ignored his letters, calls, texts, and the mermaid figurines he sent me for my birthday. I didn't understand grieving, and worse, post-grieving. Did such a thing exist? I understood that I was sad and sometimes I was happy, before feeling guilty for catching myself smiling. I missed him, so I got a diary. I wrote to my brother, telling him everything and nothing, sometimes just what I did that day or telling him how Mom was. I started attending group therapy. One girl said she forgave her father for killing her mother in a car crash, but her words became entangled in my mind, frustrating me, bleeding into confusion and anger I couldn't control. How could she forgive something like that? I asked her after, and she shrugged and said, it wasn't his fault. But it was my dad's fault, I told her, leaning forward in my chair. He killed my brother. The girl, Mia, I think her name was, I could never read her name tagged, it was either Mia or Mira, folded her arms, shooting me a glare. Well, maybe you should forgive him. When I asked Mom in the car on the way home, she said the exact same thing. It was an accident, Sadie, Mom said. Your father took your brother diving and he wasn't ready. She averted her gaze, her hands tightening around the wheel. Harvey asked him to take him out during a storm. Something ice cold trickled down my spine. What you said? She said Harvey didn't want to go diving. There wasn't a storm that night. I would have heard it. She said my brother hated the ocean and he wanted no part of it. Mom's eyes darkened and she opened her mouth like she was going to speak, before changing the subject, flicking on the radio. Do you want to get takeout tonight? I wanted to question her, but I didn't even know what to ask. But then I was questioning my own memories. Did Mom say what I remembered, or did I mishear her? It took me a long time to realize maybe Harvey's death wasn't Dad's fault after all. After a while of therapy and listening to other kids' stories, I started to wonder if hating him was the right thing to do. Mom was talking to him civilly, at least. The two of them met for coffee every Saturday, and Mom seemed like she had genuinely forgiven him. The other kids asked me if my mom was over Harvey's death, but I guess laughing was inappropriate. Grieving is an individual emotion. Mr. Prescott, our therapist, kept saying, when I was on my knees giggling into the prickly carpet. Was my mother over my brother's death? Yes, of course she was. That's what I told my friends, who I made sure stayed far away from our house. Mom was fine, I told everyone. She was completely fine, and definitely not slowly losing her mind, insisting on buying a giant aquarium for her room and named her new pet flounder Fish Harvey. Mom isn't crazy, I told myself, which became my mantra. She just had her own way of grieving. Besides, I did like Harvey. He was pretty cool for a fish, always waiting for me behind the glass when I got home from school. Mom isn't crazy. That's what I told myself again when I caught her opening the tank and trying to fish Harvey out of the water to hold him. Unlike other fish though, he didn't freak out or squirm, instead staying cupped in her hands. So, no, I finally admitted to my therapy class, bursting into tears. Mom definitely wasn't over my brother. I was 11 years old and my mother was on the brink of a breakdown. She worked all day every day, and on weekends all she talked about was either work or Harvey the fish, often pausing so he could join in conversations. Sometimes she asked him, "How's school?" I had to quietly remind her that the fish wasn't actually my brother. I needed someone normal. I found normal in the family pool, enveloping myself in my comfort zone. Over the years, I taught myself how to swim, envisioning my tail again. In my mind, I could swim away from my family and never go back. Unfortunately, I was old enough to know mermaids weren't real. The only connection I did have with the ocean was with Harvey. Dad called every day inviting me to visit. I always declined. I wasn't interested in his shiny new life. Dad was an architect and had designed his own house by the sea. I ignored him until my 12th birthday, when he sent a text which just said, "Happy birthday, pumpkin. I have a surprise for you, but you're going to have to come see it yourself. Our door is always open, Sadie. You're going to love them." I wasn't exactly ecstatic. Dad's new girlfriend, who was half his age, smelled like red tide when she came to visit, and I wasn't looking forward to the awkward conversation I would be having with my father. If I'm honest though, part of me was intrigued by the photos Mom showed me. So, ignoring my therapist who said, "Just give it a little more time," I rode my bike to his beach house after school. Dad's place teetered on the sea, designed to blend with the ocean itself. On the edge of a cliff with grandiose pillars, which were way too much, lay my father's house, cut off from the rest of the town and definitely showing off his wealth. I wasn't expecting it to be so modern. French doors leading me inside sported betta fish carvings, an axolotl in a 50-gallon tank greeting me with its trademark smile. I was hesitant at first. If I fully walked inside, I wouldn't be able to leave without having a painful conversation with my father. But running away seemed childish, even for a soon-to-be 12-year-old. I admit I was impressed. If these were the lengths he'd gone to get my attention, well, he had me hook, line, and sinker. Dad had designed his house to resemble an aquarium. The hallway was illuminated with a soft blue light, every wall a different tank filled with a variety of fish. It was almost like being in real-life Animal Crossing. Farther down, glass floors mimicked the deep ocean, filled with tiny flounders swimming below. I've always been afraid of heights, so stepping on flooring resembling the deep ocean twisted my gut and yet filled me with exhilaration, like stepping across an underwater world. It was both beautiful and way over the top. But that was Dad's MO. We always had to have the best pool when I was a kid. "Sadie?" Dad's voice startled me when I was staring, transfixed by everything around me. I didn't know what to look at first. Everything was water-themed. Even the stairs. It was pretty sure, but it didn't look lived in. The walls were filled with fish, a beautiful display of marine life showcased on every corner. I found myself pressed up against schools of Nemo fish spiraling in scarlet streams, stealing away my breath. Beautiful. But there was nothing that made this house a home. Stained coffee cups and magazines strewn all over the floor. That was Mom's house. Dad's was more like a museum. I was intrigued by the kitchen lit up in a bioluminescent glow, slowly inching towards it, when Dad's voice came again. This time from underneath me. "I'm in the basement, sweetie." I had half a mind to run. It hit me that I didn't want to see my father, I just wanted to see my surprise. The teenage brain is selfish, but I had my reasons. Still, though, I found myself drawn to the basement, my sneakers making smacking noises down the steps. Unlike upstairs, the lower levels of Dad's house were yet to be renovated. Thinking of the Death Star, there was no stair rail. My hands grazed cold brick walls, before darkness became ocean blue, like walking on the seafloor. The low hum of a filtration system cut through the silence, my steps quickening. The basement was not what I was expecting, a simple room with one singular tank. The stink of seawater and bleach drowned my nose and throat, both clinical and otherworldly, forcing my legs further. Dad stood in front, grinning beneath a banner saying, "Happy 12th birthday." I was already taking steps forward, my body in control of my mind. The tank was darker than the others, tiny green lights at the bottom illuminating clear water. I could barely register Dad's words, my gaze glued to the glass. His voice sounded like ocean waves crashing against the shore, wading in and out of my ears. "I asked my friends for a favor," he said. "They specialize in marine research and, well, during their last expedition they found something incredible, Sadie." Dad's grin was contagious, and in 3 strides, I was pressing my face against the glass. I don't know what I was expecting. Was it a new species of fish? "They're shy," Dad hummed. "Just stay there and they'll come over to you." I found my voice strangled in my throat, my skin prickling with goosebumps. They? Something warm expanded in my chest when a face appeared behind the glass. A beautiful girl with long dark hair haloing around her, tiny points on her ears and strange rugged skin. But it wasn't her face I was mesmerized by. Yes, she was hypnotizing. Every part of her seemed to glow, wide green eyes and a glittering smile. I staggered back, pride clawing at my throat when I realized she didn't have legs. Instead, a long blue tail was molded to her torso, each scale intricate and sparkling. The skin below her breast was rugged, slits carved into her flesh. Gills. This couldn't be happening, I thought dizzily. I was staring at a real-life mermaid. She was so pretty, graceful, gently tapping on the glass, playing an invisible piano with her fingers. I was joining in, laughing when the mermaid pressed her fingertips against mine, when movement came behind her, a shadow looming into view. It was a boy this time, dark brown hair billowing around him adorned with seaweed, a green tail in place of legs. There was a noticeable scar on his throat. It made me wonder if a fish had attacked him. The merman was different. Unlike his female companion, he wasn't smiling, instead folding his arms and refusing to meet my gaze. When he accidentally made eye contact, he turned and flicked his tail in my face, hiding behind the girl. Dad laughed. "The male is quite standoffish. Don't worry, he's like that with everybody." He wasn't easy to catch. I could barely speak, staring at the girl who waved, her smile broadening. "Aha!" I managed to choke out. I didn't notice my father wrapping his arms around me. His touch felt foreign and wrong, but also comforting. I hadn't hugged him in so long. I found myself missing him, and the conversation I wanted to have, all of those poisonous words in my throat, contorted into childish squeals of joy. "They're yours, Sadie," Dad murmured into my hair. "I have a deal where I can keep them here for observation, but they're officially yours." "Mermaids?" I said. Dad nodded. "Well, the scientific name for them is HAB, or human-like aquatic beings, but yes," he chuckled, "they are mermaids." Dad paused, striding over to the tank. I noticed the male mermaid flinch, almost immediately swimming over to the glass, tapping his fingers against the pane. I joined him, raising my fingers while watching his dark brown curls fly around him, bubbles escaping his mouth when he parted his lips in what I think was a greeting. The points in his ears reminded me of Faye, and I couldn't stop smiling. He looked so human, and yet these tiny details, like his ears and narrow features, told me he belonged in the ocean. I had dreamed of being able to breathe underwater, and this boy was doing just that, staring at me with coffee brown eyes. When his head inclined slowly, I couldn't resist a giggle. I figured I looked pretty alien to him. Dad nudged me playfully. "We haven't figured out their language yet. We know it's quite similar to whales or even dolphins. It's rare when they do speak, but it's beautiful, Sadie." Dad's eyes were wide. "It's almost like they're singing the melody of their world, the songs of their people." I prodded the glass, and the merman copied, his lips curling into a scowl. The female mermaid swam over, shoving him out of the way. She seemed more excited, following my fingers excitedly. "What do you think you're going to call them?" Dad hummed. I turned to him. "They don't have names?" He shrugged, and then Dad's expression was my father again, his eyes growing sad, like he remembered why I was here, and just like me, Dad didn't want to talk about my brother. Turning to face the mermaids, his smile faded. They were originally named Specimen 1 and 2, but I don't think those names suit them. I met the girl's eyes and like a child, her smile broke out into a grin. While she was wide-eyed and smiley, the male mermaid folded his arms, carefully tracking me with his gaze, lip curled, like he could sense me thinking up names. I traced the glass, the seaweed entangled in the boy's hair almost resembling a crown. I half wondered giddily if the male was a prince. Phelan, I said without thinking, and to my shock he rolled his eyes. Dad cleared his throat. The male seems to have remarkably similar characteristics to a human male, he said. His paperwork suggests he copies human expressions. I moved on to the girl, who was playful, tapping her fingers against the glass. Era? The girl nodded excitedly, copying my smile. Dad was hesitant this time to touch me, instead clapping me on the shoulder. I think she likes her name, he said, heading to the door. Al is making pasta if you want to join us. No pressure, sweetie. Dad left me with the mermaids, and admittedly the first thing I did was jump up and down like a 12-year-old. I ate dinner with Dad and his girlfriend that night, and I waited to have the talk, but it never came. In fact, when I visited the following weekend, everything I wanted to tell him was suffocated by the beings in his basement. I spent hours with the two of them, talking to Era about everything from school to my worries about my mother. She would nod and try to listen, her eyes wide like she could understand me. I figured that wasn't the case when I lied and told her an asteroid was going to destroy the planet, and she nodded excitedly, lips spreading into a grin. Sometimes she copied me. When I laughed, she did too, or she tried to. I don't think it was easy for her under the water. I started missing therapy sessions to spend time with the mermaids, but it was only Era who engaged with me, always waiting for me when I arrived, sometimes asleep, curled up at the bottom of the tank. Phelan, meanwhile, completely ignored me, instead spending all of his time either scowling at me or closer to the surface. I caught him trying to swim up several times, only to dive back down, returning to his little spot to continue brooding. As I got older, I expected the mermaids to age too. But instead, they seemed to be physically frozen around what looked like the ages of early 20s, judging from their looks. I turned 13 and I spent every summer and weekend with them. Dad told me to entertain them, try and get them used to human activities, so I introduced them to my phone, pressing it to the glass. While Era seemed impressed by literally everything, Phelan did his signature eye roll as if saying, asterisk, oh wow, it's a weird device with a light. I've already seen one. Asterisk. Dad did say the male mermaid was talented at mimicking human expression, so I figured Phelan had seen a phone. So, in my quest to impress the stubborn mare boy, I showed him a TV and then my Nintendo 3DS. He didn't seem interested in the TV, but his eyes lit up when I showed him Pokemon. I think it was the bright colors, but his eyes seemed glued to the screen, following my little character. I made an unspoken pact with him. I showed him Pokemon, playing it with him every time I visited, and he stopped with the scowling and the rolling of the eyes. Phelan didn't stop being an asshole, but every time I stepped into the basement, it was him who was waiting eagerly, his face pressed against the glass. When he saw me, the merman leaned back, pretending he wasn't waiting for me. I showed him a new game, Zelda, and he surprised me with the smallest of smiles, his eyes glued to my screen. Era sometimes joined us, but she grew bored easily, either falling asleep or swimming up to the surface. After introducing him to video games, Phelan was a lot more animated. I was 14 when I dragged myself once again to Dad's beach house. It was my first year of junior high, and I had nobody to talk to about the mermaids. When I visited them, Phelan was on the surface, leaning against the side, his head comfortably nestled in his arms. I noticed the tank was open, so it must have been feeding time. Every day around 5 p.m., Dad opened up the tank, dropping in what looked like mutilated fish guts and little flakes. Phelan always ignored the food, while Era immediately dove for fleshy entrails, stuffing them into her mouth. Phelan needed a little coaxing, so Dad thrust a long metal pole into the water, gently nudging the merman towards the food. That day there was no sign of my father, and both mermaids were on the surface. Phelan with his head in his arms and Era looking lost, her eyes wide. It was the first time I had seen her without her excited little grin. Phelan must have sensed me, since his head jerked up when I dropped my backpack on the floor. This was the first time I'd seen him fully on the surface, but when he locked eyes with me, I realized he was panting, struggling to breathe, his fingers gingerly prodding at his throat. The air must have been hurting him, I thought. He wasn't used to our air, so why was he so insistent on staying on the surface? Stupid boy. I made my way over to the tank, and to my surprise he swam over, sticking his head over the side. Phelan made a choking sound, and I understood he was trying, and failing, to mimic our language. He tried again, his eyes strained, lips parting, but no words came out, only strange guttural noises I could almost mistake for words. This happened twice. The second time, the tank was half shut, but Phelan broke the surface when he saw me come in, parted his lips, and tried to speak, seemingly frustrated with his inability to mimic human speech. He tried again, and this time I could see he was visibly struggling to stay on the surface. Era, to my confusion, pulled him back under the water, and to me pointed upwards. I did my best to communicate with her, just like Dad told me. I had to speak with my hands instead of my mouth. "You want me to open the tank?" I said, motioning upwards. "Sadie?" Dad joined me, carrying a bucket full of entrails. He dumped the food in the tank and shut the lid all the way, flashing me a smile. "I know they're pretty to look at, but they're also dangerous," he nodded to Phelan, who ignored the food, instead pressed against the glass, glaring at my father. "These beings are carnivores, sweetie. I don't mean to scare you, but I don't think swimming with them would be a whole lot of fun." I found myself nodding, watching sharp red dilute the depths, Era snatching up tangled fish intestine. I watched her eat it, sharp incisors biting through a cloud of red, obscuring my vision and spreading around her. The smile on her face no longer looked playful. She looked happy to be eating, and something ice-cold trickled down my spine when her eyes met mine, this time not with curiosity, but something else entirely, something I was in denial of. After that day, I guess I started to grow up. The mermaids in my dad's basement were beautiful, yes, but all signs pointed to them also trying to lure me into their tank. Dad didn't say they will eat you, but he did supervise my visits from then on, making sure I kept my distance. The two of them didn't change, but my childhood fantasy of friendly fish people darkened to a more plausible reality. Phelan and Era were not my friends, nor were they my presents. I was the naive prey who was almost fish food. I stopped visiting after Phelan started gesturing me inside their tank. I wanted nothing to do with them. Growing up, I still saw them during holidays. But the basement was filling up with other things, my dad's belongings and my toys from childhood. I saw them once before college, the two of them slamming themselves against the tank when I walked in. I couldn't tell if they were excited or hungry. Era's eyes were almost sad, her lips parting as if to say, "You left us." Phelan tapped the glass, cocking his head. I noticed his scar was bigger. Maybe Dad accidentally caught it when he was coaxing the merman to his food. I think Phelan knew it was a goodbye. He didn't understand the concept of college, and I wasn't going to try to explain it to him. I left them like that and never went back. Over these years, I wondered if Dad had released them back into the sea. Ever since I left home at 18, I've been flying to and from college every couple of months, due to a respiratory condition that came out of nowhere. I thought it was the mold in my college dorms, but when I moved to another room, I still found myself waking up, choking on air like my lungs refused to work. Numerous scans informed me I'm completely healthy, and all the doctor can give me is an inhaler. I was supposed to meet with a specialist in town anyway, so I figured I would pay Dad a visit. I headed back to Dad's beach house with the excuse to pick up some old trinkets I left behind. There was no sign of him, so I let myself in, making my way down to the basement. Dad had changed the lighting to a duller blue, and immediately, I was comforted with the familiar stink of salt water and strong bleach that smelled right. The stairs were wet, I noticed, slowly making my way down to the basement. The tank was still there, illuminated in dazzling blue. But it was bigger. I saw Era before she saw me, and I noticed a change in her. She wasn't smiling. Instead, the mermaid's eyes were alert, her fingers tapping against the glass. "Hey." I greeted her, a cough I couldn't control taking over. Era jumped, startled, when I knocked on the glass. Her gaze found mine, and something twisted in my gut. Her expression was wild, contorted, and not what I remembered. When she pointed upwards for me to open the tank, I shook my head, biting back the urge to say, "Nice try." I could tell she hadn't eaten yet. The tank was fresh, so my dad was yet to feed them. "Where's Phelan?" I asked, remembering how to talk with my expression. Era didn't respond. With a stoic face, she pointed upwards again. The absurdity of me talking to my childhood mermaid friend sent me into fits of laughter, which became a coughing fit. When I spluttered out a cough, her eyes widened, and I swore her gaze flicked to my torso. With the mermaid mostly ignoring me, I went in search of my trinkets I left behind in one of the towering boxes filling the basement. I was looking for my music box, and an old mermaid figurine Harvey had given me for my 5th birthday. I found myself going through memory lane, diving into boxes of old toys, and my endless collection of mermaid memorabilia. Shoving aside holiday decorations, I stuck my hands in another box, pulling out a folded yellow dress. The dress was cute, but I didn't remember wearing it. I thought maybe it was Elle's, but it was way too small. Elle was a curvy woman. Throwing the dress aside, I pulled out cargo shorts this time, followed by a short-sleeved band shirt and a Lakers cap covered in dust. With the clothes in my hands, I had a sudden hysterical thought that these were my brother's clothes. But he was dead. He died when I was 9 years old. I could feel my hands starting to tremble, digging deeper into the box. This time, a backpack with a tiny Pikachu attached to the zipper. I went through it, pulling out workbooks and crumbled schedules, a bottle of water and a crumbling sandwich covered in mold. Opening the workbooks, I flicked through pages and pages of intricate handwriting. A stress toy was at the very bottom of the pack, collecting dust. I could sense my breathing starting to accelerate when my hands grasped a bright green handbag filled with makeup, a dead phone, and a laptop. But it was right at the bottom of the box, where I found the nail in the coffin that sent bile shooting up my throat. 2 college IDs. The first, neat and looked after, on a red string, belonged to a scowling 22-year-old English major, Matthew Whittam. The second ID tag, covered in scribbles and doodles, was 23-year-old Quinn Cartwright, a smiling brunette who, according to her tag, was a film student. The tag slipped out of my hands and I puked, heaving up my mediocre dinner. Era and Phelan. The beings in the tank were not mermaids. They were human. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed the clothes again, the yellow dead with noticeable smears of red on the collar, and the cargo shorts torn and bloodied when I turned them inside out. I don't even remember standing up. With the ID tag in my hands, I stumbled over to the tank, pressing Era's identity against the glass. But she didn't even recognize herself, slowly cocking her head to the side. This hurt, a pang in my chest physically squeezing my lungs. This time I opened the tank and the girl broke the surface. She didn't speak because she couldn't, instead flailing her arms. I thought back to the scar on Phelan's throat and I felt sick to my stomach. Instead of speaking, Era pointed to the door, her eyes wide and desperate. "It's okay," I told her calmly. "Where's Phelan?" When her eyes narrowed to slits, I caught myself. "Matthew," I corrected quickly. "Where is Matthew?" Before she could respond, my father's voice sounded from upstairs, followed by what sounded like muffled screaming. Era's head snapped to me when the muffled screaming grew closer, my father's footsteps following. I could hear the sound of something wet hitting concrete like a tail. Era pointed towards a box and I understood, diving behind the door. The wet slapping noises continued all the way down the stairs before my father appeared, a bloody apron over jeans and a shirt, dragging along a figure. It was another guy lying on his stomach, blood spilling from his lips and nose, streaking down his bare torso. I had to slap my hand over my mouth. I could still see the guy's legs, or what used to be his legs, twisted into something resembling a tail. His ears still looked human, the sharp points almost looked man-made. Dad dragged the boy across the floor, panting. "It's okay," he told the boy who was half human. The guy was struggling to breathe like a fish out of water. "Once your lungs have gotten used to the water, you'll adapt." When he yanked the boy by his grotesque legs slowly morphing into a tail, the boy coughed up something that dripped down his chin. His eyes were wide and unseeing, his arms dead weights by his side. Dad carried the boy, bridal style, up a ladder to the surface. I thought he was going to throw him in, but instead my father pulled out a knife. "It's okay," he kept telling the guy in sharp breaths. "I know it hurts, but you won't be able to adapt if I don't do this." I could see Era watching, her hand over her mouth, as my father dragged the blade across the boy's throat, slicing it open and dumping him into the water. The boy sank, his body bent in an arch, sharp red blooming around him. He was dead. His tail was limp, his arms dragging him down. Era caught the boy, cradling him in her arms. Dad watched, a smile pricking on his lips. The merman jolted in Era's arms, his eyes shooting open, and when he breathed by habit, clutching his chest, a stream of bubbles flying from his mouth. When the nameless boy caught hold of himself, he pounded his fists against the glass, lips parting in a silent cry. Dad ignored him, dumping fish guts into the water and forcing him to eat them. It struck me why Phelan and Era were only alert when they didn't eat. My father was drugging their food, keeping them docile. He had cut their voices directly from their throat, carved into their bodies, cruelly molding them into my stupid fucking childhood fantasy. When my dad left them, Era tried to tell me to stay to help her calm down the new merman, who kept pounding his fists against the glass. But I think part of her wanted me to hunt down her companion. I knew from the panicked glances she kept sending me that she was worried for him. Dad said his office was out of bounds when I was a kid, and I never thought much of it. When I pushed through the door, which was surprisingly unlocked, I realized why. All around me, bathed in clinical white light, were towering tanks filled with both human and fish parts. Floating torsos and severed heads, victims no longer with identities. Dad was studying how to combine the two. His notes were strewn everywhere, screwed up and thrown in an overflowing trash can and stuck to the wall. I found Phelan pinned to a surgical table, a tube stuck down his throat. The human boy cruelly twisted into something inhuman, and yet my father was sadistic enough to continue the facade, leaving the seaweed entwined in his curls, like he was a circus act. There was a sensor above him, every movement he made setting off a sprinkler, soaking him. It was when he didn't move which glued me to the spot. When his tail dried up, I panicked, reaching to wave my arm in front of the sensor. Instead, however, to my shock, his tail started to change, contorting and morphing into something that resembled legs, but were more grotesque, cruelly stitched to his torso in a horrific attempt to change from a mermaid into a human boy. When the sensor activated, soaking him again, Phelan's body jerked, and he choked up, splattered red splashing the tube. His eyes flickered open, and he opened his mouth to speak. But his words were gibberish, his voice an incomprehensible hiss. I remembered how to move. Police. That was my first thought. I needed to get the cops. I tried to leave, stumbling over to the door, but something caught my eye. Another tank, and floating inside it, an all too familiar face. But he wasn't supposed to be so limp, so wrong. Unmoving. Harvey's body had long since decomposed, and yet pieces of flesh still remained, still my big brother, and yet his body wasn't, cruelly ripped apart and stitched together, a mutilated fishtail attached to his torso. His skin was covered in mismatched scales, like a virus taking over, shredding him apart, only leaving a slimy green-tinged substance coating him. Harvey was dead. But the thing stitched to him, entangling decomposing flesh, was still alive. I got out of there and then the house in 4 single breaths. I ran home. I woke up yesterday unable to breathe, this time choking up blood. Mom wasn't there. When I stepped into the shower, I pieced together my thoughts and what exactly I was going to tell the cops without sounding crazy. But when my fingers grazed the skin of my torso, just below my breast, I could feel 3 singular gashes in my skin. Feeling the other side, there they were, splitting my flesh apart, warm to the touch, and yet somehow feeling natural. I can't believe I'm saying this, but being in water feels better. I can finally breathe. But I find myself stumbling when I'm trying to walk, and I'm terrified. I keep getting out of breath and my skin feels too dry, like it's sucked of moisture. I tried to get into the basement earlier and unsurprisingly it's locked. There's no sign of Mom or Dad. The only thing I have right now is Mom's stupid pet fish. I feel like I'm suffocating on air. You have to help me. Please help me save the people trapped in my father's basement.